Paul Flynn, GPA head. We've got some viewer questions in here, and some of them are a little bit they're tricky ones, but I think people do kind of want to know some of what's going on with the GPA. And I'll just start. Why was the Joe McDonagh 15 dropped? Because I think it kind of speaks to the priorities of the second tier competitions, and people are very, very frustrated.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting to see the remarks over the last while. Just to take it back a bit, the Champions 15 last year. There were changes needed to it, right? It wasn't a team. It was just a selection of the best players, decided in the most part by the managers of the given team. There was no real structure behind it. There was no committee behind it to decide on who was going to get selected and so forth. And there was an appetite amongst players for change. When we were looking at it, the idea was to have two selection of 15s, 45 nominees on each side, Ring Rackard and Maher on one side, McDonagh and McCarthy on the other. And there was always going to be the case that the McDonagh players, it was going to be difficult for them to get an All-Star or a nomination. However, to get a nomination of a main All-Star was perceived to be, in many cases, I remember my first time getting a nomination for an All-Star, and I valued it dearly. Whether I got an All-Star that year or not, I didn't care. I just said, this is a brilliant milestone, because there's a subjectivity to All-Stars. If you were to pick a team and I was to pick a team, we might pick different teams. But at least if you're getting picked into the top 45 players in the country, it gave you real credibility, and you knew as an individual you were adding, you were making progress, or whether you were adding to your team or whatever it is. So, but either way, the remarks you read over the last while, and we have been engaging with players on this, and we've been speaking to them throughout the whole process. What's important now is that we review, we learn from it, and we improve. And I think that's what we will do with regards to these.
That question came in from Will O'Callaghan, Killian Curran and Siún Lennon. The next question that came in was from John McSweeney. How does Paul react to the criticism levelled at the GPA by some media sources? Because there is a bit of negativity out there. There's kind of accusations of elitism, because you mainly do deal with players at the top end of GA, the 1%, we'll say.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'll say, we represent the inter-county players. That's what my role is. That's what the organisation's role is, right?
But it feels like it's at the expense of the club player to some degree.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. I'm a club player now, and I understand that there needs to be some ways where we work together, okay? And that's through the fixtures task force, to ensure that we get a calendar that is healthy for everybody, okay? And I'm very supportive of that. We're very invested in the fixtures task force committee. But with regards to representing, I'm not going to shy away from saying I'm going to continue to represent the inter-county players. They are unique. They are the 2%, if you want to call it, of the membership that generate 80% of the revenue. And they put our game, they showcase our game to the clubs. The inter-county players are role models for our game, role models for our clubs up and down the country. They impact on broad participation. But going back to your question, I think that I've learned from being a player that there's only so much you need to focus on what you can control, and what I can control on is closing the gap between the perception that's out there about the GPA and what the reality is. And the reality is that we are there with three pillars: player representation, player welfare and player development. And under those three pillars we have the player at the centre of everything that we do. And we're putting a strategy together where we're engaged with stakeholders, an eclectic mix of stakeholders across the GAA, GPA, current past players, media, and really getting an informed strategy that allows us to put a structure in place. And I strongly believe that once this strategy is rolled out, people will say they'll engage with it, but also I think it'll close that gap between the perception and reality. And if I even go back to your previous comment there, right, the previous question around the McDonagh and the lower tier hurl, let's say, because it is important, because that elitist comment, I think it thinks we only focus on the top 1% of the top 1% of inter-county teams, and that couldn't be further from the truth. The amount of work, resources and time we put into trying to promote the lower tier competitions, whether it be through launches down in the clubs that the competitions are named after, right through to lobbying the GAA to get these games covered on GAA Now or onto TV coverage. We're constantly working with these squads to give them promotion. You see through our social media channels that we have a heavy emphasis on those competitions, because they're our members, and we want to make sure that these competitions are promoted. You've seen many of the games. They're brilliant competitions because they're teams playing against similar teams at a similar level.
Kevin Egan comes in with a three-part question, and again, they're definitely tough questions, and I think people will appreciate the fact that you're answering these questions. So, the start of Kevin's question: according to the 2018 annual accounts, the average GPA salary is just over 65,000 per person. In an organisation that's heavily dependent on volunteerism, can you see how people would have a difficulty with that?
I think it's a point that it's well made. Look, first of all, I'd say we're heavily leaning on volunteers as well. Like our whole national executive committee, our whole board are all volunteers. I was a volunteer in the GPA for 7 years. And on that board, we're proud of the governance structures that we have in place. I'm proud, a year in, even to strengthen them even further, our governance structures. We're fully compliant with the Good Governance Code for sports organisations and charities in Ireland. We've got a GAA representative on our finance committee. We present our financial finance in an annual report, but also to the GAA annually. But through the governance code, we have a finance committee with independent chair, audit and risk committee, and a remuneration committee, all with independent chairs. On our remuneration committee, we've got 3 independents on that, and these are professionals within the given field, and they dictate the salaries right top to bottom. They benchmark those salaries against organisations, charities, sporting organisations of similar sizes. So it's not unchecked or it's not quality assured. There's a proper process in place in the GPA. It's a well-run organisation, and again, I don't think people fully understand that, which is probably something that we need to explain to them a little bit further, and that kind of feeds back to the previous question around the perception versus reality.
Yeah. And then the second part of that question, according to this, you argue that the GPA should get a greater share of GAA funds. There's an article linked to where you speak about that. In 2018, the GPA's total turnover was 7.6 million, total GAA turnover is 63.5. Your current share of the GPA's is 12%. What do you think would be a fair percentage?
I didn't see them, but them figures are incorrect anyway. With regards to the percentage figure is incorrect. That is our turnover of 7 million. I'd actually a bit more than that, but 3 million of that comes directly from government, which is dispersed right to players. It's passed through. It's licensed and given out to players in the form of a grant. So that decreases the money that we get from the GAA. But equally then, the GAA's turnover there is highlighted, I think it's 60 million, I think he said. That's just the GAA's accounts, but there's also Croke Park's accounts, which is based off the stadium. You could say they're different, but the stadium wouldn't be there without the games or the players. And that's in excess of 50 million. So overall, their turnover is around 110 million, if you look at it like that. So I'm increasing one side and I'm decreasing the other side, so the percentage is a lot lower. And, but forget about the numbers for a second, right? People read articles, they take things out of context, they feel that the GPA are there to drive this towards professionalism. We're there to support the player, and what we really need to get ourselves to is a sustainable form of amateurism. If you think about going back to our 3 pillars about what we do, we represent the players, we protect their welfare and support their development. The development piece is all around them as professionals. I don't care what colour jersey they wear or what age they are or whatever. It's them as professionals to develop them. If we're developing them as professionals, they're going to live that dual life. They're going to be amateur athletes, but they need to be supported to do so. And one of the biggest expenses at the moment on players is their nutrition allowance. It's colossal, is the nutrition costs. And every squad now has a nutritionist who's advising and prescribing a diet that they have to eat. So costs are going up, and as are demands. So when we say that it's about asking for more, it's because the demands are going up on players. You see that through the student report as well. So we're not just looking for money for the sake of it. We're looking for money for the players to support them. These are the guys who generate, the 2% of the playing population, the inter-county, are the guys who generate 80% of the revenue. They are the revenue generators within the game. They need to be supported. And some people have their opinions on that. But the players, and we have another view on that. And again, it's about that sustainable form of amateurism, and it's a unique position we're in because it's unique games, but we need to find a solution to it.
I've looked over your annual reports like 2019 and 2018. Huge amount of money, like as you said, goes to the players and the grants. A huge amount of money also seems to be spent on a huge amount of courses that players can do via the GPA. Now they're not itemised in any way, shape or form, but there's definitely, I've heard people talk, and I want to put this to you because you're obviously trying to debunk any myths going on. Like, are there any people that are salaried by the GPA that are also being brought on board to get courses, getting paid for them? And I know you declare related party interests. Like, for example, Seamus Hickey, completely above board, got $5,000 for something or other last year. But are there any people that are salaried by the GPA that are also being brought in and paid to run courses?
No, absolutely not. No, and like, there are people who would say we're service providers to the GPA, but that's all. The service level agreements for anybody who works for the GPA, but absolutely nobody's salaried and them running courses as such.
Yeah, because
but the key thing about that is our staff, our frontline staff. Everybody who works there is dealing with players on an ongoing basis, 24/7. And whether that's be through development programs where they are running a program, or whether that be taking a call from a guy who's having suicidal ideations in the middle of the night. These are the demands that our staff are under. So the players deserve to have really positive people working for them, really qualified people working for them. And we're lucky now that we have a team in the GPA that are operating really well on behalf of the players.
that's a variety of tricky questions, so I appreciate you stepping up to them.
I'm delighted to answer questions like these, Shane, because what it does is it helps dispel myths, and in the absence of communication, people just make up stories which are untrue. So, as I say, over the course of my tenure in this role, I'm happy to have ongoing conversations with you, and maybe we can close that gap between perception and we get closer to what the reality is.
Thanks, Paul. We'll chat again soon.